interesting and interactive first session. Thank you for adhering to my request of cutting short on the break time. Now we move on to the next session, which is going to talk about the new reassessment regime and issues under the faceless assessments and first appeal scheme and some case studies. And for the session, I would like to invite the moderator, Kavita Jha, who is partner with Vaish Associates Advocates on the dais. She's part of the firm and is based out of the Delhi office when she moved her practice from the High Court of Kolkata to the High Court of Delhi. She's also been an advocate on record in Supreme Court of India since June 2007 and specializes in tax litigation, income tax, VAT and sales tax, as well as criminal law and arbitration. Thank you, Kavita ma'am, for agreeing to be here with us and moderate the panel. Along with Kavita ma'am, we have on the panel Rohan Umranikar, who is partner with Transaction Square. I can see. Rohan, thank you for joining us from Pune. Thank you for taking the flight and joining us today. Rohan is a chartered accountant and holds a bachelor's degree in commerce and a master's degree in arts. He has been an all India rank holder in the CA exams. Rohan has more than 16 years of experience in handling corporate tax and international tax issues and business restructurings. Thanks, Rohan, for joining us today. Tejveer Singh, partner with DMD Advocates, is a qualified chartered accountant and a practicing lawyer with over 18 years of experience. Over the course of his career, he has dealt with a broad array of matters in the field of accounting, finance, taxation, with focus on litigation, primarily in the areas of international tax and transfer pricing. Thanks, Tejveer, for joining us today from Mumbai to Delhi. We would also like to invite Karanjot Singh, who is joint partner with Lakshmi Kumar and Sridharan on the dais. He is a joint partner with the firm and has been a member of the direct tax practice since 2015. He advises on various issues in corporate tax, international tax, and transfer pricing. I would invite all four of you on the dais and request you to please kickstart the session. To the audience, online and offline, the only request is keep the questions coming in the way you have supported in session 1. Ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible, loud and clear. Although I didn't wanted to use this, but I was told since the people who have joined offline, so it will be better that I use mic. I generally don't like to use mics, even in courts, I feel that I have a loud and a clear voice, so no point using it. So since my team has already been introduced, I've got a young, energetic, enthusiastic team, but equally enthusiastic moderator as well. So, issues are already there, the agenda item is already there. So there are a couple of questions which I have prepared for my panelists. So I'll be asking those questions, and definitely it's going to be a very interactive and a very educative session. So let me start with the topic. So the first topic which we are taking is on the reassessment proceedings. All right, my first question, Rohan, it is for you, Rohan. Yeah. So what are the key changes in the reassessment framework? Before we get into the reassessment framework, I just wanted to add 2 lines that we all are aware that by Finance Act 2021, there has been a sea change in the reassessment proceedings. Prior to Finance Act 2021, there was a different regime which was in existence, and the Finance Act 2021 in fact has codified the GK and Reischauft rule. GK and Reischauft rule was basically a principle laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court, wherein there was a set of guidelines which an SSE was supposed to follow when he gets a reassessment notice. Now Finance Act 2021 has actually amended, entire law has been changed. So let's understand from Rohan that what are the key changes in the reassessment proceedings.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. As you rightly mentioned, there has been a sea change in the reassessment framework. So previously, before Finance Act 2021, under the old reassessment regime, basically an assessing officer could initiate reassessment if he had reasons to believe that certain income has escaped assessment. And once a notice under section 148 is issued to an assessee, the proper course of action would be, as ma'am referred to, the GK and drive shafts ruling, where it has been laid down that the assessee should file a return of income, and then the assessee can seek the reasons that have been recorded in writing by the assessing officer for reopening the case. And the assessing officer was duty bound to supply those reasons within a reasonable time, and the assessee could raise objections against those reasons, and then the assessing officer typically would pass a speaking order, either agreeing or disagreeing with the objections raised by the assessee, and subsequently reassessment proceedings would begin. Now there has been a sea change in terms of how the procedure works. Also on the timelines, there is a difference. Previously, under the old regime, there were 3 timelines: 4 years for general cases, 6 years for very specific cases, and 16 years for cases involving foreign assets. With Finance Act 2021, there's a big change on how the reassessment procedure will work, how the timelines will work. Also, it has been further expanded by Finance Act 2022 in certain areas, which we will speak about. When it comes to the new regime, the major change, as ma'am referred to, is basically the codification of the entire procedure. Once an inquiry is started, how the assessee and the assessing officer should basically address the reassessment proceedings. So it typically now will start with the assessing officer having some information which suggests that income has escaped assessment. So it's a slightly lower threshold as compared to reasons to believe. It says information which suggests that income has escaped assessment. Now once assessing officer has this information, then he can start an inquiry. If he so requires, he can start an inquiry, but there are administrative safeguards put in place. At various stages of the reassessment proceedings, he has to seek approval from a specified authority. So even when he begins his inquiry, he has to obtain an approval from the specified authority, which is specified depending on the timelines involved. Then if the inquiry results in the assessing officer reaching a conclusion that it's a fit case for reassessment, he will basically issue a show cause notice to the assessee, and giving a reasonable period of time for the assessee to respond to the show cause notice. The assessee is supposed to then respond, raise objections, and then the assessing officer will, again with the approval of his superior, pass an order and then issue a notice under section 148. So this is how procedurally this will be taken care of. Now on the timelines as well, there is a change. So we now have only 2 timelines, 3 years for general cases and 10 years for cases which, if we see the finance minister's speech and remarks, it should be used only in exceptional cases where there is an active tax avoidance or misrepresentation. The threshold is also higher. It says that the reassessment can be initiated after 3 years, but before 10 years, if there is information which reveals that certain income has escaped assessment. So it talks of information revealing this, which is a higher threshold than information suggesting escapement. Also, the escaped income has to be represented in the form of an asset which crosses 50 lakhs. Now this has been expanded to also cover book entries and expenses on a transaction or expenses on an event which crosses 50 lakh by Finance Act 2022. So these are the key changes in terms of how the reassessment used to be initiated previously and how it will be reinitiated, how it will be reassessed now. This also gives rise to 2 or 3 very important issues in terms of the assessee contesting reopening of cases. In the previous regime, as we discussed, there were 3 timelines, 4, 6 and 16. For reassessment to be done beyond 4 years, and in cases where 143(3) scrutiny assessment has been done, basically if the assessee has supplied all information relevant to the assessment, he has disclosed fully and truly all material facts pertaining to the assessment, then the assessing officer couldn't have reopened this assessment. There's no such condition now. So this defense typically goes away as long as the assessing officer is compliant with the information related requirements. The other issue is that, and we'll talk about it in more detail, is this whole information. What is information? Does it also mean that a change of opinion can lead to reassessment now? Under the previous law, reasons to believe this phrase was interpreted by courts in a manner restricting the assessing officer's ability to reopen cases if it was a mere change of opinion. Now again, there's no such language in the Act. So does it mean that he can reopen a case even if there's a change of opinion? The third issue is that under the previous section 147, the language of the section, if you read the language, it talks of income which has escaped assessment, for which the assessing officer has reason to believe that it has so escaped, and after complying with the procedural requirements, he can reassess that income. And also, he can reassess income which comes to the notice during reassessment proceedings. Now, this phrase "and also" was interpreted by courts to mean that if the reassessment fails on the primary issue for which case has been reopened, then any other issue cannot be reassessed. And there are rulings of Bombay, Delhi, various high courts on this particular matter. Now, section 147, 148 doesn't have this language. So the primary defense which an assessee had in terms of addition in respect of other issues, that goes away. So even if the assessing officer reopens a case based on information which suggests that a particular income stream has escaped assessment, but that is struck down by courts, let's say, but during the course of reassessment he realizes there are these 2 or 3 other matters which have also escaped assessment, then he can do an addition on those 2 or 3 other issues, given that there is no language. The defense goes away basically. So
yeah, I think Rohan is talking about explanation 3. So explanation 3 specifically said that in the course of reassessment proceedings, so for example, there is a reassessment proceedings on the issue of section 14A, right? And the assessing officer feels that no, 14A is a very small issue, it's a very minuscule, I don't want to go ahead with 14A. And he starts looking at your section 80, chapter 6A deduction or 80 HHD, 80 HHC deduction. And ultimately when you get a reassessment order, you find that initially when the reassessment proceedings had started, 14A doesn't come into the picture at all. What all you have is your chapter 6A deduction, and that ultimately that is the order. So that is the reason Jet Airways and other courts which have taken a view, they said that once you, and explanation 3 is definitely there. So once the reassessment is reopened, then the entire assessment proceedings is there before the assessing officer, he can take any other issue. But while doing this, you cannot give up your original notice on which you had assumed jurisdiction. So once an assumption of jurisdiction is on issue 14A, ultimately you give up 14A and come to X, Y or chapter 6A deduction, that is not permissible. Although this issue has not attained finality because Jet Airways and Ranbaxy, these issues are before Supreme Court and Supreme Court is dealing. But what Rohan was explaining, that ultimately this particular provision of explanation 3 has been given away, has been given up in the new regime, right? Yeah. All right. So we have been hearing a lot about TOLA, and we all are aware of this pandemic. During this pandemic, since the limitation got expired on 31st March 2020 or 31st March 2021, and we know typically the department has a habit of sending notices only on the last date. And I think many SSAs only receive the notice at 11:58 or 11:59 before the 12 o'clock. The clock has to go. It will 11:58 in your email box, you will get a notice for 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16 and so on and so forth, right? But because of this pandemic, this TOLA Act was introduced and there was an extension of time. This TOLA was challenged and the High Court in the lead case, I'm talking about Delhi High Court, various High Courts have given a finding in the judgment of Manmohan Kohli, ultimately said that the explanation which was there in the TOLA, that is ultra vires of the Parent Act, right? In this context, Karan, if you want to throw some light on the TOLA issue.
Yeah, good afternoon everyone. So I think this issue for Taxation and Other Laws Act, or as we call it TOLA, this issue arose because of the peculiarity of the timeline at which these amendments to the reassessment procedure came. So we were in the middle of the pandemic, and obviously on account of that, various timelines under the income tax law, they had to be increased. So a wide array of powers were given to the executive to extend the timelines. So there was a start date being 20th March 2020, and there was an end date being 31st March 2021. So if there was any period for compliance or any statutory deadlines that were to be followed by the income tax officers also, essentially there was a power with the income tax, with the central government to extend these timelines, right? That is what essentially TOLA provided. Now, as far as reassessment is concerned, wherever the period of limitation for issuing notices under section 148 that expired during this time, ideally the period for issuing reassessment notice stood extended to 31st March 21. Thereafter, by subsequent notification, this was further extended to June 21. Now, in the middle of this, Finance Act 2021 that was promulgated, and essentially the reassessment provisions, they underwent a change. Now, the effect of this was that immediately overnight, from 31st March to 1st April 21, as Rohan pointed out, the procedure for reopening the assessment, as also the time limits for issuing the notices, they completely underwent a change. So, a question arose now that on 1st April 21, how the procedure that has to be followed. Is it the new law or it is the old law that has to be applied? The central government felt fit to make it clear in terms of the notification that only the old law has to be applied. So essentially, while notifications, what was sought to be done, the period of limitation, the period for the application of the old procedure or the old law was sought to be extended till 30th June 2021, which is contrary to the provisions of Finance Act 21. Before the High Courts, the question was as to whether it was within the central government's power to extend the application of the old law and therefore instruct the officers to issue the notices under the old law. On this, I think we had a number of High Court judgments, I think barring Chhattisgarh High Court. All the High Courts were of the view that these notifications that have been issued prescribing that the notices are to be issued in terms of the old law, they are ultra vires the TOLA Act itself as also ultra vires Finance Act 2021. So where the legislature had already occupied a field and they had specifically provided that a procedure and a new particular kind of law starting 1st April 21 has to be followed, it was not open for the central government thereafter to say that the old law has to be followed, and this obviously also goes in the face of the otherwise settled position that as far as the procedural law is concerned, the moment the procedural law comes into effect, thereafter if any procedural act has to be undertaken, then that particular procedure under the new law has to be followed. So the High Courts held that, and thereafter I think the matter went to Supreme Court and there was Ashish Agarwal case, which I think the other panelists will be discussing.
Yeah, no, you're correct, absolutely. I think you have summarized Manmohan Kohli. In fact, the settled law is law on the date of issuance of notice has to be seen. So what the SSCs were contending before High Court was that you don't have to see the old law or the new law. On 1st April 2021, if a particular SSC is receiving a notice for reassessment, then what is he supposed to do? Is he supposed to go as per the old law and get himself assessed under the old provision or the amended provision as prevailing on 1st April 2021? So all the High Courts in India specifically held that once Finance Act 2021 kicks in, that assessing officer is bound to follow the new law. So notice on the date when the assessment, we have to see the date of issuance of notice. So the law has to be followed is that particular law which is there in the book. Now this particular judgment of Manmohan Kohli and Ashish Agarwal was basically from Allahabad High Court. This was challenged by Revenue before Honorable Supreme Court. And Honorable Supreme Court, by invoking powers under Article 142, which is a constitutional power, has laid down certain guidelines. So Tejveer, I'd like to ask this question from you. So can you tell us the key takeaways from the Supreme Court judgment, and then please also cover that the CBTT has issued an instruction on the implementations. So what is your take on that?
So, very briefly putting it, what has been just discussed. First is that there was an amendment in the law, and when the notices were issued post during that period, an issue arose that the period post amendment should be applied, or when the law post amendment should be applied, or before the amendment. And as Kavita ma'am and Karan mentioned, that the High Court quashed all the notices, saying that if you issue the notices after the new law has come in, then the new law should be applied. You cannot apply the old law. The matter traveled to the Supreme Court. Now, very interestingly, the Supreme Court said that all the High Courts are correct. The new law should have been applied. And then they went on to mention that the new provision that has been coming into play provides a lot of relief to the assessees, more of a benevolent provision. There is an individual mechanism for permissions from the higher authorities. There is application of mind, and after that, then they proceeded and said that, but the revenue will be gravely prejudiced if we quash all these notices. Hence, these notices will be deemed to be issued under the new law. So now that's what the Supreme Court said. Now many issues arise out of it. So first is that Article 142 could have been invoked in this case or not. But vis-a-vis your 148A, after that I think the notification was also issued by the CBTT, which clarified, which they have interpreted in a manner which benefits or say suits the point of view to the revenue. So considering that, with this notification stated that for all the years, even for assessment year 13, 14, 14, 15, the notices which are issued are valid. The Supreme Court has clearly stated that all the defences under 149 to 151 are available to you. Now, if you read 149, there it is clearly provided that timelines for earlier notice, you cannot go the timelines beyond as provided in the earlier scheme. So that is very clearly laid down. So only maximum 4 years or 6 years could be invoked, 10 years periods could not be invoked. But having said that, the notification has been issued, and post that I think it has been challenged where the Punjab and Haryana High Court has issued a notice to the revenue, and it was also issued in Delhi High Court has looked at this issue, and I think they have not supported the assessing side primarily. It seems that because the Supreme Court has already taken the view that why they are invoking Article 142 is because so that the revenue should not be prejudiced. If you look at it in a broader sense, probably then that's the reason the High Court is not interfering. But on this note, I would like to know because we're stalwart in all these issues. You have an instrument in Ashish Agarwal.
I am the culprit, Manmohan Kohli, I am the culprit, Ashish Agarwal, I am the culprit, and digital signature also I am the culprit. So that was yes.
So first question that arises for section 13, 14 and 14, 15, could they have validly, are the notices issued valid? Can we do something at this stage?
I think, frankly speaking, Tejud, I liked your style of, in fact, instead of asking the question to the panelist, he has put the question to the moderator. Very smart way, but I would definitely like to answer your question.
Because since we are so experienced, of course, I mean, so.
No, but I would compliment for your this, I think quite witty, so yeah. I said for 13, 14, 14, 15, it is my personal view. I frankly believe that when you see section 149, the proviso, the first proviso is very clear. It says that you cannot open an assessment which is already a time bar. Why am I saying a time bar? Because it talks about 6 years time length. So in the earlier regime, so there was 4 years, 6 years and 16 years. So it says that anything which has become time barred, you cannot reopen that under the Finance Act 2021. So prior to Finance Act 2021, there was a time limit of 6 years. So for 13-14, if the 6-year period has already elapsed, and so for TOLA is concerned, TOLA, the explanation which was there, which extended the time limit, that has already been declared as ultra vires by the Delhi High Court. And the Supreme Court has categorically in paragraph 7, paragraph 10 has said that we agree with the views of High Court, but only, and then all the defences were kept open for the SSC. Once you treat this, and the defences are open to the SSC, then in the same breath you can't say 13, 14 and 14, 15 is still valid and they can still continue with the assessments. Of course, Delhi High Court has taken a negative view. They, according to them, the limitation, if you read this notices along with the TOLA, which according to me cannot be applied, you cannot travel back in time. It's like, it's a very contradictory situation. What the High Court and the department is trying to do is, They say that you travel back in time. I said, where do you get this? Travel back in time. Like for example, for 13-14, let us take an example of 13-14. You go back for 13-14, what they are trying to say, that 1st April 2021, suppose you have received a notice for 13-14. So 1st April 2021, what the Supreme Court has said? Supreme Court has said that notices are not invalid because of, you will treat these notices issued under the new regime, but this is not a 148 notice per se. This is a 148A small a, which means that notice has been given to you for next procedure, because we know GK and right shaft, there is a series of steps which are there, which has now been codified under the new law, which means you will get a notice, you have to file a return, you will ask for reasons, you will file your objection, and there will be a rejection, and then you come to High Court. See, all these procedures are now in the new regime itself. So when you get a notice under 148A, the next step needs to be followed, and then ultimately you get a notice under 148. It is not that you are getting notice on 1st April 2021. So according to the department and Delhi High Court, what they were trying to interpret, that 1st April 2021, notice has been issued to you. You travel back in time, and there you see that TOLA Act is there, since it has extended time till 30 June. So they had that power, and that is the reason that 13-14 is valid, which according to me, it doesn't come out from the Supreme Court judgment, it doesn't come out from Manmohan Kohli or Ashish Agarwal. So this interpretation according to me is not valid. And then to buttress my point, Punjab Haryana High Court, Calcutta High Court, Bombay High Court, Rajasthan High Court, all have taken a view. Right now it's in an interim stage, so all of them have issued notice. Even after the Delhi High Court have taken a view against for 13-14 and 14-15, the Rajasthan High Court have issued notice and they have granted interim relief to the SSC. So we can't say that 13-14 has, there's a dead end. 13-14, 14-15, according to my view, it's a very good case, and I think it is worth fighting it out. It won't stop here. Again, this has to go to Supreme Court. If you really read the finance minister's speech, it says to reduce litigation and to give quietus. According to me, both these objectives is not fulfilled after this new regime has come into existence. In fact, Delhi itself witnessed more than 3,000 petitions on this new system, and of course the entire country has seen this. So I don't think this new particular system or the implementation of this CBDT instructions will put an end to litigation. This litigation is increasing day by day, and I think everybody is fighting maybe a small issue, maybe on a definition of information, maybe on a definition of 50 lakhs. Even for, you will be surprised that circular itself says that for 13-14 and 14-15, if an amount of escapement is less than 50 lakhs, then there will be no reassessment. Department is issuing notice even for an amount of 39 lakhs. Then what is an SSC supposed to do? Because they have a standard format answers. You file reply, they will see reply seen not tenable, rejected. That's the template they have. So you per se, per force, again lawyers are, they are, it's told it's very good for lawyers. Why are you worried? You can always go to court and keep on fighting. See, we as lawyers, of course, we want to have more cases, want to fight out. But ultimately, you are answerable to your clients. What are we supposed to tell them? I said there is no finality in that sense. There is no quietus. We cannot put an end to litigation. So it goes on and goes on. Like first, for example, we did first round, we went to Ashish Agarwal, again came back, second round and third round, and then now again we are on the fourth round of litigation and it will go on. So that means according to my personal view is 13-14, 14-15 is a fit case, and according to me, because of section 149, the defenses, it is a fit case where we can actually defend our SSCs.
And also, if I may just add to that, I think if we look at it, the history of it, whenever the department issues reassessment notices, then most of the notices are quashed at the appellate level. So it's not that the jurisdictional conditions are actually fulfilled. So around 90,000, I don't know how many of them would be having any substantive issue to cover. So
yeah, I think you are very right, and I think your observation is also correct. Ultimately, we know the department is the maximum litigation which is there, and of course, we are grateful to the department in that sense, because the maximum litigation is from the department itself, and it is not that the success rate, if you see, the success rate is very low. So I think you rightly put that 90,000 notices which have been issued across India, how many notices will ultimately fructify is anybody's guess. So we don't know. So all these right now, we can't say, even for 13-14, we are in 2022, in 2023, next 10 years, it has not come to an end. So the battle is continuing, and I think we have to again keep on fighting about this.
After the Supreme Court judgment, now the cases will be done as per the new regime only?
It is being done as per the new regime.
What is the status of certain other cases, whether those cases are
Just give your example.
Lot many cases are there pending. People have gone.
Yeah, like for example, I give you 1314. So Ashish Agarwal has laid down principles, right? Like 148A notice is given to you, you get an information. Like for example, in your case, there is an report from investigation wing. Investigation wing sends you that you have cash deposited in the year 2016 and they send you a notice, right? And the information has also been given, document has also been given. So next step is you will file reply. Right? You will file reply, they will consider the reply, and after considering a reply, they will issue you a notice under 148. Like in one of my SSC's case, the amount was less than 50 lakhs. In other case, they said you have taken loans from X company, wherein I have not done any transaction with that company. So even it is as per Ashish Agarwal, you are doing all the requirements are being done. That what am I supposed to do? I am fighting out those cases before High Court and I have got stayed. So I said, this is not coming to an end. So this is how you are fighting out. But 1314 on the limitation part, the Delhi High Court view is against. So in the case of Touchstone, they have taken a specific view that 1314, because 1314, 1415, according to me, limitation point was one of the best point which an SSC had. Because if you really read the entire Manmohan Kohli, Ashish Agarwal, the CBTT instruction, the 149 proviso, all defenses, if all this read together, definitely 1314 and 1415 is barred by limitation. But right now, since this issue is not, it's not final, this has to ultimately, Supreme Court has to decide on this.
So another query that you say that in one of the instances, suppose the reassessment is on 14A and they have touched upon some other things also. In case 14A is sustained, then only
other issues can be sustained. Yes.
Otherwise,
yes. Yes. The new regime is. If you see the old regime, explanation 3 is specifically there. Whenever explanation 3 is there, it means if I issue you notice on X and in the course of assessment, I see when you come that there is Y and Z also. So I can always do a reassessment provided X also I keep. So I have to keep that along with me while doing an assessment, completing my assessment on Y and Z. If I leave X, the substratum of the notice itself goes.
But what happens that in a prolonged litigation at Supreme Court level, that X thing gets deleted. So then automatically my other two decisions will be deleted? You mean to say that?
No, X, see, I'll give you an example. For example, in this, because this has happened in one of my matters, that is the reason out of practical experience I'm saying. For example, in your case, the matter, I'm again taking 14A because that is one of the most litigious section. They have initiated proceedings under 14A, right? And ultimately, when your assessing officer was completing assessment, he also did, additions on PPF and ESI issue, right? So your addition, so reassessment proceeding is valid because he has started with 14A, ultimately 14A, PF and ESI, all the issues have come in the assessment order. And when this matter travels, ultimately it goes to Supreme Court. Supreme Court finds that on 14A issue, the assessing officer has no case. And he says 14 issue goes. But on assumption, that is on merits of the matter. But on assumption of jurisdiction, whether assessing officer had validly assumed jurisdiction and passed reassessment orders, that won't go. Because that has, several levels have gone and ultimately reached to Supreme Court where they say on 14A, for example, there is no exempt income. So 14A won't be there. You cannot make any additions. So for those issues, you can't say that assumption of jurisdiction at a particular point of time was invalid. That's how it has to be.
Yes.
Even
if 14A can be deleted, but in case the assumption was taken rightly, then on the other two additions can be sustained.
That's right.
If I may just recapitulate this. So basically, it depends upon the facts of each case. So it doesn't matter what Ashish Agarwal says. If on your suppose assessing officer not able to assumption of jurisdiction is not correct, then that will be allowed. For example, it's a settled proposition of law that the notice could only be issued by the jurisdictional assessing officer. Some other officer issues you the notice, then it is not a valid notice irrespective of what Ashish Agarwal says. That's another example of what she said.
Yeah.
Also, just to add one more point. In terms of the assessment years, apart from AY 13, 14, 14, 15, the same analogy can be extended to AY 16, 17 and 17, 18 because even for those assessment years, if you see the CBDT instruction, it says that these cases are within the 3-year limitation period. So again, they are applying the same logic that you take the notice, you travel back in time and see, calculate the 3-year period from 30th or 31st March 2020. So AY 16, 17, 17, 18 both get included within the 3-year period. But again, if we, the same arguments will apply with equal force even for those assessment years, and hence it can be forcefully argued that this is not within the 3-year period, it should be considered within the 10-year period, and hence there has to be a higher onus on the tax department to meet the conditions for reopening the case in that 10-year period.
All right, just I have one question any one of you can answer. So Supreme Court judgment, Ashish Agarwal, it says, it all pending matters. So do you think it is applicable only where writ petitions are filed, or even where the matters are pending at the commissioner stage, this Supreme Court judgment will be applicable? Any one of you can answer.
See, I think when we go through the fine print of the judgment, I think this issue actually remains unanswered, because at the stage where the Supreme Court is making modifications to the High Court judgment and reference to Article 142 is being provided, it seems as if the reference is being made only to reduce the burdens for High Court. Because if the Supreme Court had merely stopped by saying that the High Courts ought not to have done this, the matters which were still pending, that would have still required a High Court order. So it is possible to infer that from the judgment that it was supposed to be applied only on the writ petitions that were pending. However, there subsequently the way High Courts have read the Supreme Court judgment, even in matters where assessment orders have in fact been framed, in fact in one Bombay High Court judgment, they have stated that even when the assessments were framed and the notices were issued within the period of 1st April to 30th June 21, even there on account of the Supreme Court judgment, the assessment orders go away and the procedure given in the Supreme Court judgment has to be followed. So this issue obviously remains contentious and still unanswered. In my view, strictly reading the Supreme Court judgment, it seems to suggest that it was only applicable for the pending petitions which were there before the High Court. Obviously, like giving it that reading at least will dilute the effect of the judgment to the extent that it will create a situation where there will be certain level of assessees where the same wrong procedure was followed. But in those cases, those assessments will be completed, those assessments will be struck down because they were not as per the procedure, and there will be cases because certain people only went and filed writ petitions, their reassessment notices will get validated. So that will create a skewed position, but that is how the Supreme Court judgment is worded. So according to me, this matter will have to be litigated and we'll have to wait for the Supreme Court to clarify on this point.
And I'll just out of my practical experience, I'll add one thing, that in fact, how the SSA officers have interpreted, it's brilliant. And in fact, I've contested a matter before Delhi High Court. What they have done is, one of my SSC, there was a notice under the old regime, he had contested that, there was an addition of almost 8.5 crores made, and then he filed appeal. And of course, he has not taken any point on the new procedure because it wasn't applicable to him. The assessing officer passed a specific notice. He said, look, my earlier order which I have passed, it is non-est. Why? Because of Ashish Agarwal. I recall that particular order, and all of us are aware that assessing officer under the Income Tax Act has no power to declare his own order as non-est. So he has no power to, say that my order which I had passed is a non-est, I'll pass a fresh order. He said, look, I'm giving a new notice, you please come and comply with this procedure. I went to High Court, I told High Court specifically, I said, I am in appeal, whatever additions you wanted to make, you have sent me another notice. So the council was saying that what is your problem? You are getting there's a complete natural justice. You can come, you can explain your case. I said, why am I supposed to do that? When I'm already before commissioner, all my additions have been done. Why should I withdraw from there, come again in the process and come to the same line again? Because I know what your assessing officer is going to do. He's supposed to make addition again of the same amount. And then what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to go to the CIT appeal. So the Delhi High Court had to intervene. He said, this is not the way you can go. So the second proceedings which is ongoing, this has to be quashed. So they have quashed the second notice. They said where the matters are pending before Commissioner of Income Tax, the department cannot go ahead with the second proceeding saying my original order, early order becomes a non-est. So that is how it comes into the respite. Okay, since time is short and there are a lot of issues and I don't want to miss my panelists and not speaking on any of the topics, I'll go to the next judgment which is again delivered by Delhi High Court. It is talk of the town now. It is Sumanjit Agarwal. So on this Sumanjit Agarwal, before I speak anything, I like Karan to just tell, if you can tell us or explain the key takeaways from that particular judgment.
So again, this is a transitional issue. So just to recapitulate the facts of this case, now there were certain cases where the notices were prepared on the ITBA portal of the Income Tax Department on 31st March 2021. Now the portal is designed in a way that it only sends out emails for 400 notices every minute. This is done so that the external party servers like Google, Yahoo, etc., they don't see the mails being sent out through the ITBA portal as spam, and therefore the notices are sent in a phased manner. Because 31st March 21 was the last date, and the officers were also fearing of the change in the procedure on next day, being 1st April 21, a number of officers wanted to send out the notices to the SSE. Now, it just so happened that on that given day, because of the sheer volume on the portal, the pending time for sending out the notices, it exceeded 6 hours. This is based on the affidavit that the department has given before Delhi High Court. So what happened is, on the portal there seems to be an option. One, they could generate the notice and not digitally sign it, and the notices could be sent later. Secondly, they could generate the notice, affix the digital signature, and thereafter the notices would be sent out. These were the two options that the officers could exercise. There what happened is, the officers actually generated the notices, the DIN, the unique identification number for each document, was assigned, but the notices remained pending in the portal. Now, the notices, after the signatures were affixed, or in certain cases without affixing the signature, in fact, I think it was Kavita Ma'am only who in fact made those 5 categories before the High Court, and there were 5 categories of cases depending upon whether the signature was affixed or not, and whether particular point in time when the notices were sent out. So these notices, as a matter of fact, were sent out from the ITBA portal on or after 1st April 21. And in certain cases, they were also sent through email or through speed post. So based on this, the question that came before Delhi High Court is, now that these notices are being sent from the ITBA portal on or after 1st April 21, what is the regime that has to be applied? Point being, if these notices are considered to be issued on 31st March 2021, which was the department's case, then in that case, these should be covered under the old regime. Whereas, as per the judgment of Supreme Court in Ashish Agarwal itself, if the notices are issued on or after 1st April 21, then in such a case, the new regime has to be applied. Thereafter, the Ashish Agarwal will apply to these judgment, and the effect of that has to be seen separately. So the court was to therefore determine as to what is the date of issuance of notice. This is in light of the fact that section 149 provides for issuance of notice and not of service of notice. So therefore, if it is determined that the notice is issued on 31st March 2021, that is sufficient to apply the old regime, both in terms of the procedure as also the period of limitation, right? Now, what has happened? Delhi High Court has considered a number of arguments given by the petitioners and has effectively laid down the law that in terms of the Information Technology Act, referring to section 13 of it, as also considering the position as it existed in terms of the physical issuance of notice, the notice should be considered to be issued on the date when it leaves the hand of the person who is sending out the notice. So therefore, the notice has to be seen on the issuance of notice will be on the date when the originator loses control on the notice. The department contended that, well, as per the ITBA portal, there is a time lag there. So the moment the officer has assigned DIN to it, you see as if the officer has lost control of the notice. Therefore, 31st March 21 happens to be the date of issuing the notice. Delhi High Court has not accepted this proposition. They are saying that it is true that the originator is the assessing officer, but ITBA portal is nothing but a computer resource. So in terms of Information Technology Act, the the communication has to go outside the computer resource, which is in the control of the originator. Therefore, meaning that the notice has to go out of the ITBA portal, and thereafter the notice will be considered to be issued. Invariably, in all these cases, the notices had gone out on the portal on or after 1st April 2021, which obviously the High Court has also instructed the officers to determine. But as a principle, what the court has stated is, if that is the case, then these notices will be subject to the procedure as laid down in Ashish Agarwal's case, and that is to say that the new regime will be applicable, and that process has to be followed as far as these reassessment proceedings are concerned.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you only. I think my next
So
question.
only, just
Yes.
one thing I have, just
Yeah.
one thing I have to add,
Yeah.
is that, so basically, the court has held that just uploading on the portal is not enough unless there is a real-time alert sent to the SSC. So that will constitute a service. So unless you have received, and in fact, just because you have uploaded the portal doesn't mean service. SSC logs in after 1 month or have registered instance after 1 month, then a service will deem to be completed after 1 month, not on the date of this thing. So that's what the sum of it.
See, before I get into the faceless assessment proceedings, I have two questions on this. If you could quickly summarize, Karan, Tejveer and Rohan, three of you. One is on the information as per section 148, what do you understand by that? And my second question is that I want an answer for this also, that can you say that as per section 282 clause A, you can give a complete go by to digital signature? That if a notice is not signed, because under the manual system we knew that if a particular document is not signed, it is not valid at all. So can DSC be given a complete go by as per Sumanjit? And then what do you understand with the term information? If you could quickly explain, then we'll come to faceless. Yeah.
So on this 282A, so the interesting bit, like just to take it from the judgment again, 282A subsection 2 provides that a notice will be deemed to be authenticated as long as it bears the name and the credentials of the assessing officer on the notice. Thereby, what the court has inferred in this judgment is that even if the notice is not digitally signed by the officer, on account of 282A, the notice will be deemed to be authenticated. There are two aspects to this that I just want to highlight. One, in my reading, on account of amendments made by Finance Act 2022, which obviously were not before the court, as per section 144B, which now governs this faceless assessment, it is no more a part of a notification now. In fact, it is now a codified law.
That's right.
On account of section 144B, subsection 6, it categorically states that authenticated notices have to be sent to the registered email address along with a real-time alert. And authenticated notices for the purpose of section 144B have been categorically defined to mean as those where the digital signature of the assessing officer has been affixed. So I just wanted to make this position clear. To my reading, as far as position from 1st April 2022 is concerned, the notices will definitely have to be authenticated by way of a digital signature. That's point number one. Point two, it's not as if this position did not existed in the past. In my humble view, see, the notifications that were issued by CBDT categorically provided that the notices to be issued by the assessing officers have to be authenticated by way of a digital signature. So therefore, by giving a constructive reading, according to me, what the court should have done is, they should have said that as far as these set of notices are concerned, where the faceless assessment is applicable, on account of the CBDT notifications, these notices were definitely required to be authenticated only by way of a digital signature. And therefore, on account of CBDT notification, 282A should not come to the rescue of the department. Right? In any case, as I said, going forward, this position is already taken care of, because now at least the 144B categorically provides that notices have to be authenticated only by way of a digital signature.
So are you trying to say that for these 3 months, SSCs should, just give up this point?
So according to me, because the CBDT notification still existed, and the way the court has dealt with that CBDT notification, they say that because the ITBA portal allowed the assessing officers to issue the notices without signing them, that they have taken as one of the factors to say that the notices are valid, obviously cannot be the basis of justifying the notices, because the CBDT notification provided for authenticating it. Now, the effect of breach of CBDT notification is something that will have to be challenged, because whether that itself makes the notice non-est or not, that is yet to be seen. But in this case, surprisingly, in fact, the court observed that the notifications that were issued by the CBDT were only applicable in relation to the verification scheme, which I think is not the case. They were in fact also applicable for the assessment part
Yes,
also.
correct, that's right.
So I think that seems to be more of like a perversity in the order. Obviously, this should be challenged before the Supreme Court, and then the effect of the breach of CBDT notification in any case has to be seen, and that will be considered by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think you're right, in Karan. In fact, in this electronic age, we can't treat these things to be very light. And especially when you talk about authenticity, and as an SSE, how would I know that this has actually come from the assessing officer per se, until unless I see that digital signature?
Yeah, I mean, just
So
on
you're
a
correct.
lighter note, just on a lighter note.
Sure.
In fact, I've come across cases where, because these are all digital notices, certain fake notices are being sent to the assessees asking for their bank account details. This is one of the new ways in which, the scammers are reaching out to the assessees. So as ma'am is saying, in the absence of this level of authentication, how do I know what level of detail is being provided? I have seen my clients receive notices under section 133 asking for some very, very sensitive information for their customers.
Yeah.
And these notices are not digitally signed. And if you ask me, where no officer is taking onus to sign the notice itself, how do I suggest my client to then provide the information for a customer to a third party? Now, it is more serious when these notices are being received by banks. How do banks share the financial credentials of their customers with a person who's not even ready to sign the notice? They don't know the authenticity of this notice, right? And many cases, notices are being sent by post. So you don't know what is the level of authenticity, and therefore in such a case to sort of then share the information becomes challenging.
That's right. Quickly, if both of you can add what regarding information in terms of section 140, then we can go to the next issue and face this.
So of course, the definition of information has been amended by this act earlier, but till last year it was only information collected by a risk management strategy. First of all, there also, if you see that many notices has been issued. Like one that comes to my mind is that notices issued to the NRI because their mutual fund redemption mismatch, because their information is not getting complied properly. Notices are issued to all of NRIs who have made investments. So I think that's another controversy where thousands of, at least hundreds of notices are issued for sure. So that is one part, but this year amendment is made and certain other points are added. Now other point which is added is audit objection. Now if you see historically, see the various writ petitions of Bombay High Court or any other court for that matter, then we will see that every case where the assessee went in writ and said that there is an audit objection, all those cases were dismissed by the notices were quashed by the honorable court. Because audit objection is what? When assessing officer files are monitored by the CAG and they say is there any problem in the file, and like the way government department functions, just to show that they have done some work, they will pick up certain cases and show that there are problems. So adding this, I don't know what is the great benefit that seems to come out of it. Now the another point which they've added is information exchange under section 1998. So under DTAA, under article 26, there is a provision for exchange of information. Though Switzerland has shared certain information, Dubai has also shared certain information. But I think, is that complete? Because the kind of information that you get is so incomplete, is shallow in the sense. On that basis, subjecting someone again seems to be this. And just one more point I have to add. Another point which they've added in information is any effect on your income due to any order passed by any of the court. That seems to be still valid. Like for example, you get some compensation under the Lands Act and you finally went to the court and the Supreme Court finally enhanced. In those cases, but I think there were enough adequate safeguards within the act itself to capture that kind of income.
Yeah.
So just to add, the way they have defined information, and as Tejveer said, this will also include audit objections and any information coming from the risk management system.
So the issue is that does it take away the defense of change of opinion? Because that was the biggest defense which a taxpayer had, so that the assessing officer does not review his own assessment order under the guise of reassessment, which I think principally the defense still remains. But given the way they have defined information to even include audit objections, it definitely will lead to more litigation, because the assessing officer can review his own assessment order by saying that this is an audit objection raised, and as this constitutes information based on which I am going to reassess your income.
Yeah, that's right. And just one final word should be of the moderator. If you really see the, thank you. I said if you really see the notice which is now being issued, 148, there is another new column which has come. Not only which is there as per the terms of the definition, but also information as per the decision of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Ashish Agarwal. So this doesn't find mention in section 148 at the definition of information. So this is a new point, new information which is there in the reassessment notice when you are seeing 148 notice. This is something I thought I'll add.
Actually, there is under 133, 6 notices are issued for 1 year, 2 years. The scrutiny didn't happen. So they issued collecting information in 133, 6 notice, and there put in asterisks. Please file an updated return in case you think there is a problem.
So that's similar to what is happening.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I think it was very interesting on this reassessment part. Now, there is another point on which I think all the SSCs, all the chartered accountant lawyers are facing a lot of trouble vis-a-vis the face-test assessment proceedings. We thought face-test, all the SSCs were pretty happy because, of course, in fact, the finance minister itself in the speech said there is a lot of corruption which is there in the department, and they wanted to decrease this, and they wanted that there should be no interaction between the assessing officer and the SSC, which I don't know which is happening in reality, but that is what the objective was. So we can see it has got some good aspects, some positive results and some negative results as well. I'll request all three of you, if you could just tell us what are the challenges which is being currently faced by your clients in this face-test assessment proceedings. If you can start, Tejveer or Karan or Rohan, any one of you. So there are 3 more topics which I have to cover, so I won't let them go for lunch. So it depends on you how fast. So in fact, if people keep on looking at me that quickly finish, I'm not going to stop till the time I finish with the other 3 pointers I have. I have those questions for you as well. So you'll have to finish those.
Yeah. So, okay, very quick. So the problem is, one very common problem which we were facing earlier was that, adding your income in the 30% bracket, a lot of times your incomes are in the 60% bracket. But I think that has been taken care of. Now they put a provision where show cause notices to be issued before finalization of the assessment, where they provide you as to what the issue is. The second, I think the problem which a lot of people are facing is that when it was a scrutiny and we were dealing it physically, then the exchange of information a lot more easier. Now, in the case of, take example of big companies where there's a lot of information to be supplied, first of all, scanning of the document, usko upload karne mein takes many hours, and it's very difficult to explain a lot of times. So I think these are the issues which we are facing.
See, I think one general observation that based on our conversation with our clients that we are seeing, the faceless assessment scheme is being seen as a very compartmentalized set of instructions from the board, and as if these are applicable sans principles of natural justice, right? By very name, the principles of natural justice have to go along with the process of assessment. And therefore, the department at all levels has to ensure that the assessees are given an adequate opportunity to make their case. See, in many cases, it's actually the point that it's just about understanding the context and viewing the things from an assessee standpoint, because at the end of the day, that's the law made by the Supreme Court, that things have to be seen from a businessman's point of view. Now, what is happening is, in many cases, we are seeing before the due date itself, the assessing officers are finalizing the assessment orders, right? Obviously, if you don't hear out the assessee, you don't provide them an opportunity of hearing, and you take the personal hearing as a matter of discretion, then you won't even get to know the context in which the claim was made by the assessee. So therefore, according to me, what really needs to happen is that a logical sense has to prevail. And at all point in time, the approach from the department side has to be to adhere to the timelines, where very short timelines are given, to reasonably accept the request for adjournments. And then also in certain cases, wherever the matters are complicated and it so requires, to provide that these crypto assets in many cases are leading to escapement of taxes, and therefore they had to come with some sense of regulations. It's just that at this stage, the way these assets operate, and our existing tax framework, they are sort of not gelling with each other, and that is leading to this friction.
No, that's right. Nupur, do we have 10 more minutes? There's just one topic we can we take that? We'll try and finish in 10 minutes.
We can just ask one question.
Yes, all right. On this topic on virtual digital asset, any one of you want to concluding remarks, or should we go on to the next topic? Yeah, thank you. All right, so there's one issue I thought, since all of you are here, if you could just throw some light on this, because the overseas investment framework has undergone a significant changes with effect from 22nd August 2022. So just wanted that what was the old overseas investment policy and what is the key difference which has come in this new Indian overseas investors. Could you just throw some light, Rohan, on this?
Sure. So there has been a sea change again on the overseas investment framework. The new policy is effective from 22nd August 2022. It's in the form of 3 policy documents: the regulations, rules, and directions, which have been issued by the government and by the RBI. Now, the new framework basically seeks to have more clarity in the provisions, as well as liberalization in various aspects of the overseas investments. To give you examples, in terms of clarity, there are many definitions which have either been newly introduced or have been tweaked, so that there is more clarity on implementation. There's a definition now specifically of overseas direct investments, which says that even a single ownership of a single equity share of a foreign company will be treated as ODI. And OPI, or overseas portfolio investment, has also been defined. It wasn't defined previously, and hence there always used to be some confusion as to whether a particular investment falls under ODI or OPI, and hence which regulation is to be followed. Now they have also defined OPI to mean anything which is not ODI and excluding unlisted debt instruments. So there's clarity on ODI, OPI. There's clarity on net worth, which was a teething issue because under the old regime as well as under the new regime, an Indian company can invest up to 400% of its net worth. Now, what is net worth? Previously, securities premium was not getting included in net worth. Now, they have aligned the definition with the Companies Act, and hence it can now be included in the net worth computation. Then there is also a definition around what constitutes foreign entity, Indian entity, and that leads to more clarity in terms of which entities an Indian investor can invest in. As long as the overseas entity has limited liability, Indian residents can now invest in those in those entities. There's also a definition of what constitutes a strategic sector, and there are relaxations for investments in those sectors as well. Two more definitions which are of importance. One is bona fide business activity and the other is financial services sector. These were again not defined in the old regime, and now there's a definition of bona fide business activity. Anything which is legally permissible under the laws of the foreign country or the under Indian laws is a bona fide business activity. Basically, an Indian company can invest in a foreign company which is engaged in a bona fide business activity. And given the lack of a specific definition, what constitutes bona fide business activity was always left open to interpretation. So there's thankfully some clarity around this. Financial services, it was a restricted sector. Now it has been liberalized significantly, and it's a very significant liberalization because previously Indian FS companies could only invest in in overseas FS entities, not in non-FS entities, and Indian non-FS entities could not invest in overseas FS entities. Now this has been liberalized. As long as you have a profit track record of 3 years, an Indian IT company, for example, can go ahead and acquire an overseas financial services sector entity. And FS sector, financial services sector, has been defined to mean that if that particular activity is carried on in India, if it constitutes a financial services sector activity, then it will be a FS sector activity. So the definition is now very clear. What is FS, what is non-FS is clear. The liberalization will help, given that there is a lot of appetite with the Indian promoters to go ahead and invest in various sectors, including the FS sector. Another important change, and which will also encourage a lot of capital flowing into India or easy access of capital for Indian promoters, is the change around round tripping. Now, round tripping of investments was never very specifically included in the directions under the old regime. Now, what they've done is they've allowed round tripping, which basically means that an Indian investor invests in a foreign company which has an investment back into an Indian company. Under the compounding orders which the RBI had issued, the RBI had interpreted this to mean that the overseas company is not engaged in a bona fide business activity. Given that there was lack of definition of a bona fide business activity, RBI was interpreting it in this manner. Now what they've done is they've said that this is permissible subject to one condition, that there should not be more than 2 layers of subsidiaries in the structure. So Indian company investing in a foreign company which has subsidiaries either in India or outside India, this is now permitted, as long as there are not more than 2 layers of subsidiaries in the structure. So again, this will really help a lot of Indian promoters get access to cheaper capital outside India, form joint ventures outside India, either for investments back into India or overseas, because lots of legal clauses as well, like anti-dilution or liquidation preference, etc., are more easily enforceable outside India. And some new age businesses are better appreciated in the overseas market still as compared to the Indian public market. So if you form a joint venture outside India for investing either into India or overseas, it will lead to a more easier flow of capital and valuations as well for the Indian promoter. One more liberalization which will spur M&A activity and generally flow of capital is around pledging of assets. So previously an Indian promoter, if he wants to raise funds outside India for an overseas acquisition, for example, then he could have pledged the shares of the foreign company or the assets of the foreign company only to a financial institution or a lender which is regulated as a bank. Now we know that banks have a different risk appetite as compared to some of the private equity or private institutions which can fund these kind of structures in a more sophisticated manner. So they can also take some equity risk, and it could be in a hybrid form. These structures were not allowed previously. Now the definition or the regulations have changed to allow an Indian promoter to pledge assets of the foreign company or the shares of the foreign company even to any overseas lender for that matter. So private funds can now invest, give a debt which is like a hybrid debt, take more risk. They don't typically require the collaterals that bankers would require. So it's easier to fund overseas acquisitions now with the liberalized framework that we have. There's also liberalization in terms of corporate restructurings. So previously mergers, acquisitions, demergers, liquidations, all of that required RBI approval in certain cases. That has been liberalized. Now it's all under the automatic route. Then transactions like deferred payments. If I am selling shares of an overseas company and I'm supposed to get the money in a deferred manner, that also required RBI approval. Now it's under the automatic route. Write-off, if my foreign company has incurred losses and I need to write off my investment in India or at the overseas level, again that required RBI approval in some cases. That has now been liberalized. So there are lots of liberalizations which will basically simplify, it will give more clarity, and it will also spur M&A activity. It will enable Indian promoters to raise money outside India in a much more easier manner.
I think you're very nice. In fact, this topic itself, I think Ashish will have to hold one more seminar or a panel discussion, because this is such an interesting, and there's so many issues which will come in your one's mind. So thank you, Rohan, for this. And Karan or Tejur, if you want to add something, otherwise we can close this
Just
session.
I think tax always interests me, so I just had a couple of tax issues that I just thought I can add to this ODI. So Rohan mentioned round tripping. So I think immediately that sort of took me to section 96, where round tripping for the purpose of general NT avoidance rules under income tax has been deemed to be an impermissible avoidance arrangement. I just wanted to mention that in 1991, India obviously liberalized the Indian sectors and gave outsiders access to Indian market. ODI is liberalizing the scheme in order to provide Indians access to outside market. But having done that, obviously we have to be mindful of the fact that if the structures are made, that the investment is made outside and brought back to India, and the sole intent of this is to get a tax benefit, we could risk GAR. That is one thing we have to keep in mind. This also comes along with that the risk of place of effective management. So if people are only sitting in India and managing companies outside, which are then obviously investing back into India, that could risk the place of effective management. Obviously, the turnover of the foreign company for that has to exceed 50 crores. That is as per the CBDT circular. Lastly, because in many cases these structures are opted by Indian startups to get the investment at an overseas level, we also have to look into the transfer pricing issues, especially on account of the BEP section plan and DEMPE functions now being recognized, where the development of intellectual property is happening in India, and then the intellectual property is being transferred to the parent so that the monetization can happen there. Thereafter, if the Indian company is paying royalty to the parent for using that very IP which was developed here, the valuation of that IP will be very critical, both at the time of transfer to the parent and then at the time of paying the royalties. So these ODAs, definitely I think the move is welcome, but the moment this will provide some tax incentives, we have to be careful as to whether how the transfer pricing and the profit allocations needs to happen, and whether the structures can be pierced through for the purpose of levy of income tax by application of GAR.
GAR. Yeah. Thank you so
In fact,
much.
there was article that was published in the Economic Times which said that the partners of the law firm who've been visiting India have been told not to have any client meetings because they pose a risk of GAR. So some of them actually went to Singapore, called their clients to Singapore, attended meeting and came back.
Yeah, that's true. So thank you so much, all of you, Karan, Tejveer and Rohan. Thank you so much. I in fact thoroughly, trust me, I'm sure you people must have enjoyed. I have thoroughly enjoyed the session myself. So thank you so much. Thanks to three of you, and thanks Ashish for having this panel discussion. So thank you. I can see Sandeep clapping there.
Thank you, ma'am, as always, for joining us and making this session interactive and informative. Thanks, Tejveer. Thanks, Rohan. Thanks, Karan. So now with this, we would take a lunch break and we plan to start the last technical session at 2:35, worst cut 2:40, so which is about 25 minutes behind schedule. We plan to close the session by about 4 so that people who want to beat the traffic can beat the traffic and be at places where they want to be, and there are some people who have flights to catch. They are also able to reach airport well in time. Thank you for your questions, and thanks to all of you once again.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Kavita ma'am, her inputs are most valuable. He didn't say thanks to you. That's why.
Oh, not at all. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Sure.
You're giving me crypto you're talking about, right?
I was about to tell him.
Mine's
You can also be on the right side.
You already have it, ma'am. कितना लोगे?
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Which I'll tell you offline. Sure. Last one. Thank you. Lunch is right outside the hall.